"This barn's been cleared 3 times already. There's nothing here but dust and rotten hay." Deputy Nolan's voice cracked with impatience as he kicked a rusted pitchfork out of his path, frustration rising with each passing hour. The sun was setting over the Monroe farmland, casting long, tired shadows across the wrecked fencing and sagging rooflines. Search teams had combed every corner of the property, from the shallow creek to the rusted-out tractors buried in overgrowth. And still, no sign of the kids. 4 children, gone for 36 hours. Siblings and cousins, last seen playing near the edge of the woods before vanishing into thin air. No footprints, no calls, no ransom notes. Just the slow, unbearable ticking of time and the aching faces of parents who hadn't slept since Friday night. Sergeant Drew Mercer stood quietly near the barn entrance, arms crossed, jaw clenched. He'd been in law enforcement for 2 decades and had never felt a silence like this. It wasn't the quiet of completion. It was the silence that screamed you missed something. Beside him, K9 Zeus let out a low, sharp whine. "Zeus is just tired," Nolan muttered, brushing hay off his pant leg. "We've been at it for 15 hours. He's probably reacting to a raccoon nest." But Mercer didn't answer. He was watching Zeus now, closely. The dog was pacing, nose low, tail stiff, moving toward the far corner of the barn where the floorboards sagged into a patch of compacted dirt. Zeus stopped, barked once, then started digging. "Wait," Mercer said, stepping forward. "Let him." Zeus's paws kicked up clumps of dry earth with frantic urgency, claws scraping against something harder beneath the surface. Nolan rolled his eyes but stayed back as Mercer crouched down, and then the smell hit him. Not decay, not death, but something unmistakably human. Sweat, fear, dirt. Zeus backed up and barked again, pawing the earth and whimpering like something just beneath was calling out to him. "Get the tools," Mercer said sharply. "Now." Nolan ran. Within minutes, more officers rushed in with shovels and flashlights. The quiet barn suddenly filled with movement. Zeus stayed pressed to the side, pacing in a tight circle, watching every motion. Then came a shout from one of the Yai. "Diggers!" "Sir, something's here." Mercer dropped to his knees, brushing the dirt away with his hands. A hand, small, pale, fingers curled around a torn piece of fabric. "Oh God," someone whispered, and then the hand moved. "Alive!" Mercer shouted. "They're alive! We need medics! Now!" The next few moments blurred. One by one, the children were pulled from a narrow crawl space buried beneath the barn floor, covered in mud, weak from cold and dehydration, but breathing. 4 children. The oldest, a boy of 10, held the youngest in his lap, whispering something as she blinked against the sudden light. A girl around 8 clung to the boy's sleeve, and the last, a quiet child with scratches across her arms, looked straight at Zeus and reached for him. He stepped forward slowly and lowered his head, pressing his muzzle gently into her shoulder. She didn't cry. She just closed her eyes. Later, after the ambulances had come and the barn had emptied out, Mercer sat beside Zeus on the steps of the old feed shed, staring out into the dark fields. "They were right under us," he said softly, "and we almost walked away." Zeus rested his head on Mercer's knee, tail thudding once against the ground. They thought the barn was empty, but the dog knew better. The emergency lights bathed the old barn in pulses of red and blue as medics swarmed the scene, voices urgent but controlled. The children were being stabilized one by one, wrapped in thermal blankets and gently loaded into ambulances parked along the dirt path. Their faces were pale, lips cracked, eyes wide and hollow, from hours spent in darkness and fear, but they were alive. That single truth wrapped around Sergeant Mercer like armor against the storm that had been brewing inside him since the call came in. He stood just outside the barn doors, arms crossed tight over his chest, watching as Zeus paced near the dug-up. Crawl space, restless and alert despite the chaos around him. He wasn't ready to relax. Not yet. Mercer crouched down, running a hand along Zeus's back. "You knew," he whispered. "When none of us could see it, you knew." Zeus didn't move. He just stared at the crawl space like there was still more buried beneath the surface. One of the paramedics, a young woman with a calm voice and steady hands, approached Mercer with a clipboard. "We're taking all 4 to County General. They're dehydrated and cold, but miraculously stable. The boy, Ethan, says they were lured into the barn by someone they didn't recognize. Someone who said he was looking for a lost dog." Mercer's stomach dropped. "A decoy?" She nodded grimly. Once they were inside, he locked them in a pit under the floorboards, covered it with hay and planks. It's barely tall enough for a grown man to crouch in. They think he meant to come back for them. Did they see his face? Mercer asked. Not clearly, but the boy said he wore a sheriff's jacket. Mercer stood slowly, his jaw tightening. We don't have any deputies unaccounted for. I know, she said. That's why it's scary. As she walked back toward the ambulances, Mercer felt the cold creep up his spine. Someone had impersonated law enforcement, used trust like a weapon, and nearly got away with it. They would have succeeded, too, if not for the dog at his side. Zeus let out a low growl, his nose twitching again. Mercer turned to see him creeping toward the shadows behind a collapsed wooden feed bin. His posture was tense, tail stiff, breath shallow. Easy, boy, Mercer said, reaching for his flashlight. He moved slowly, sweeping the beam toward the bin. The dust shifted unnaturally, like someone had been there, recently. Fresh prints, a torn fabric caught on a nail. Then, movement. Mercer's hand shot to his weapon just as a figure bolted from the shadows. A man in jeans, dark boots, and a brown sheriff's department jacket. Wrong color, wrong patch. Stop! Mercer shouted, charging after him. But Zeus was faster. The dog leapt forward with precision, lunging toward the man's ankle and bringing him down hard in the mud. The figure thrashed and kicked, but Zeus didn't let go. By the time Mercer reached them, the man was face down, hands pinned behind his back. You picked the wrong uniform, Mercer muttered, cuffing the man tightly. The suspect muttered something, unintelligible. His face scraped and bloodied, but Mercer didn't listen. He called for backup, hauled the man to his feet, and shoved him toward the waiting patrol car. Zeus followed, muzzle flecked with dirt but eyes bright with intensity. Later, as the barn emptied and silence crept back over the property, Mercer sat on the back bumper of his cruiser, Zeus at his side. Across the field, the sunrise began to creep over the horizon, casting the sky in soft orange light. For the first time in 2 days, it felt like the night had finally ended. One of the deputies approached with a file. He's ex-Forest Service, fired 3 years ago for impersonating an officer and trespassing on private land. Slipped through the cracks. Not anymore, Mercer said. They're saying we only found the kids because of Zeus. Mercer looked down at his partner. They're right. The deputy nodded, then added, families want to see him. Zeus, Mercer smiled faintly. Let's give them that. That morning outside the hospital, 4 families waited with tears and open arms. Zeus stood among them, tail wagging softly, ears perked, letting tiny hands rest gently on his back. The children didn't need words. They just needed to feel him, to know that what had saved them wasn't a machine or a miracle, but something brave and alive. Mercer stood back and watched it all with quiet awe. They had almost walked away from that barn, but K9 Zeus had dug deeper, into the earth, into the silence, and into the space where no one else dared to look. And, because of that, 4 children went home. By the time Mercer returned to the sheriff's office that afternoon, the scent of mud and adrenaline still clung to his clothes. He had washed his hands 3 times and still couldn't get the barn dirt out from beneath his fingernails. Zeus walked a half step behind him, his stride slower now, the full weight of the day beginning to show in his muscles. The old dog's eyes were tired but calm, like someone who had seen something terrible and, just for once, stopped it in time. Inside the briefing room, a crowd had gathered. Detectives from neighboring districts, child welfare officials, the press team, and a forensic analyst who looked like she hadn't blinked in 2 hours. Mercer walked past them all with a quiet nod, Zeus trailing loyally at his side. Chief Ramirez was already waiting at the front of the room, arms crossed, lips tight, eyes sharp. You caught the guy. You brought the kids back. And now I've got half the state wanting an update by sundown, she said. I'm not giving them anything until I've got facts that hold up in court, Mercer replied. No press rush is worth losing the truth in translation. Ramirez nodded. Good, because what we just found changes everything. Mercer raised an eyebrow. The forensic analyst stepped forward with a tablet in her hand. She tapped it once, and a still image filled the screen. Grainy surveillance footage from a gas station 30 miles north of the Monroe farm. The man in the brown jacket, the same one who Zeus took down in the barn, was seen getting into a black van 3 days before the children disappeared. That van, she said, was reported stolen from a local power company. Inside we found children's clothing, blankets, and a list. Handwritten, names, ages, and what looks like behavioral notes. Mercer's stomach dropped. He was tracking them? She nodded. We believe he's done this before, Chief Ramirez added. And he wasn't working alone. A chilling silence settled over the room. Mercer glanced at Zeus, who sat watching quietly from the corner, his ears twitching. It hadn't been random. It hadn't been isolated. The crawl space under the barn, the fake badge, the way he lured, the kids using a fabricated search story. It was methodical, practiced, and dangerously precise. Who's helping him? Mercer asked. We're still trying to find out, Ramirez said. But you need to know, this case just got bigger, federal level bigger. They're sending agents tomorrow. Mercer exhaled slowly and nodded. Then we start digging wider. That night, Mercer drove home with Zeus beside him in the passenger seat, his head resting on the dashboard. The cruiser was quiet. No radio, no chatter, just the sound of tires humming along the dark road. As the lights of town faded behind them, Mercer pulled off onto a gravel turnout overlooking the woods. He parked, turned off the engine, and stepped outside into the crisp evening air. Zeus followed him out, stretching slowly, then padding up to the edge of the overlook. Below them, the land sloped into dense forest. It was peaceful now, but Mercer couldn't shake the image of that barn, the trap buried beneath silence and hay, the children so close to never being found. He'd never forget the sound Ethan made when they pulled him from the dirt, the way he clutched his baby cousin like she was the only thing keeping him anchored to this world. Mercer leaned against the hood of the car and scratched behind Zeus's ear. We almost walked away, he said softly. All those hours, and none of us saw it. But you did. Zeus turned his head, looking up at him, eyes soft but alert. Mercer didn't say anything more. He didn't need to. The bond they shared went beyond commands and training. It was born in moments like these, when silence spoke louder than words, and instinct filled the gaps where doubt lived. Back at the hospital, the children had started talking. Ethan told investigators about the man with the wrong badge, the way he called them over calmly, even joked with them before trapping them inside the pit. The little girl with the scratches, Amelia, said she thought they were going to die until she heard the first bark above them. She said it didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like someone calling her name. The next morning, national news ran the story under a single headline. They thought the barn was empty until K9 Zeus dug up 4 missing kids. Photos of the scene spread across the country. Zeus, covered in dirt, standing beside the open hole, tail up, nose down, eyes fixed on something no one else had seen. And Mercer knew the truth. Zeus hadn't just sniffed out a hiding place. He had pulled hope out of the earth. He had forced the world to look harder, listen deeper, and remember that the most extraordinary acts often come from those who don't speak at all. Because while the officers searched, and the parents prayed, and the town held its breath, only Zeus had the courage to dig. The morning light did little to settle the unrest in Sergeant Mercer's chest. His phone vibrated non-stop on the corner of his desk. Calls from the press, district attorneys, worried parents, and now, federal agents requesting immediate access to everything they had. The town had erupted overnight. What began as a local missing persons case had turned into something far more sinister, and everyone wanted a piece of the story. But Mercer didn't care about the noise. His focus was locked on a new report, one he couldn't stop staring at. The man they arrested, Richard Blaine, had served time a decade ago for identity fraud and unlawful surveillance. But what the updated background check revealed was worse. He'd been part of a failed child services sting years prior, suspected of posing as a volunteer to gain access to vulnerable children. Charges had been dropped due to lack of evidence. No one followed up. Until now. Mercer leaned back in his chair, heart heavy. He rubbed his temples, then looked down at Zeus, curled near the filing cabinet. The dog had barely slept. Even now, his ears twitched at every hallway noise, body tense, alert. Something was still wrong. Mercer could feel it too, that incomplete pull in his gut, like they'd only uncovered part of a nightmare. A soft knock interrupted the silence. Deputy Nolan entered, this time without the sarcasm or swagger he normally carried. He looked shaken. You need to see this, Nolan said, handing over a grainy photo printed from a trail cam. Mercer squinted. A timestamp in the corner read 4:17 a.m., just hours ago. The image showed the same black van Blaine had been seen driving earlier in the week, only now it was parked deep in the woods north of Monroe. More disturbing was the second figure, taller, wearing a mask, standing near the edge of the frame, holding a child's backpack. We think he wasn't working alone, Nolan said. but we were wrong about who was leading. Mercer stood immediately. Where was this taken? 5 miles from Hollow Creek. No structures, just woods. Mercer didn't hesitate. He whistled sharply. Zeus sprang to his feet, eyes instantly locked on Mercer's hand as he reached. For the leash and vest. Let's go, Mercer said. No more waiting. They drove in silence, the dirt road winding through trees thick with frost. The deeper they went, the more the world seemed to quiet itself, like the forest was holding its breath. Nolan followed in a second vehicle, while a third car trailed behind with 2 forensic techs. As soon as they arrived at the trailhead, Zeus leapt out, nose to the ground before his paws even hit the dirt. Mercer gave him one word: search. Zeus took off down the trail. The team followed behind carefully, sweeping flashlights across every tree, every log, every hollowed stump. Minutes passed, then Zeus stopped. He barked once, sharp and urgent, then began to dig beneath a pile of leaves and broken branches at the base of a cedar tree. Mercer rushed forward, brushing aside debris, and then he saw it, a steel hatch, nearly invisible beneath layers of forest. Floor. No markings, no locks, just bolted shut and stained with rust. Nolan's voice was tight. What the hell is this? Mercer knelt and pried it open with a crowbar. It groaned loudly, the hinges resisting until they finally gave way. Oh, thick, damp smell rose from the ground. Mold, soil, and something far more human. A narrow ladder led downward into darkness. Zeus growled low in his throat. Call for backup, Mercer ordered. We don't go in blind. But Zeus had already moved. He stepped forward, paws finding the rungs of the ladder one at a time until he disappeared into the dark below. Mercer swore under his breath and followed. The space was small, an underground storage bunker, 10 by 10 feet, with concrete walls and a single flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling. Blankets covered the floor, bottled water, food, coloring books, toys, and in the corner, chained to a post with duct tape still wrapped loosely around one wrist, was a boy. He couldn't have been older than 7. His eyes were wild with fear, until Zeus approached him slowly, tail down, posture calm. The boy recoiled at first, then froze. Something in him recognized safety. The boy reached out, touched Zeus's nose. That's when Mercer entered. He unchained the boy carefully, lifting him into his arms. The child was light, too light. You're okay now, Mercer whispered. You're safe. By the time they reached the surface, backup had arrived. The techs confirmed what they feared. The bunker had been used before. Traces of small shoes, faded fingerprints, worn blankets in stacks. This wasn't a first attempt. Mercer watched as the boy was taken to the medic van, Zeus trotting beside the stretcher like a shadow. For all the noise of police radios and camera clicks, the dog never left the boys' side. Back at headquarters, Mercer filed the final report with trembling hands. They had uncovered not just one perpetrator, but a network. Investigations would stretch across counties now, possibly states. It would take months to unravel the full story. But today, a child was rescued, and 4 others were home because one dog refused to stop digging. Later, as Mercer stood in the kennel room brushing Zeus's coat, he felt something unshakable rise in his chest. Not relief, not pride, gratitude. Because where men had walked past empty barns and silent woods, one dog had listened, and that changed everything. The media vans didn't leave for days. By the time the last one rolled away, the town had changed. Not just in headlines or viral clips, but in how people looked at silence. The barn off Hollow Creek was no longer just a forgotten building rotting under the weight of moss and dust. It had become a symbol of everything ignored, everything dismissed, everything hidden in plain sight. Sergeant Mercer stood on the porch of the precinct, hands in his coat pockets, staring down at the commendation plaque that someone had nailed to the wall. In honor of K9 Zeus, who found the unfindable. He didn't smile. It wasn't that kind of pride. What they uncovered beneath that steel hatch haunted him every night since. The drawings the children had made in the dark, the way the boy flinched at light, the calendar scratched into the concrete. Someone had taught them to count the days. Someone had expected them to stay. Inside the precinct, the boy they rescued, Elijah, sat beside a caseworker, clutching a toy Mercer had given him. It was a fabric replica of Zeus, hand-stitched by a retired officer's wife who'd heard the story and couldn't sleep until she did something. Elijah hadn't spoken more than 10 words since his rescue, but every time he saw Zeus, his hands, reached for the dog with the same quiet certainty, like he knew, even without words, who had pulled him back from the edge. Zeus sat beside the boy now, alert and still, ears perked like he was listening for something only he could hear. Every few minutes, Elijah would lean into him, rest his cheek against Zeus's fur, and breathe like it was the only place he felt safe. By the following week, federal investigators had unraveled what Mercer couldn't have imagined. Richard Blaine was just a recruiter, a cog in something larger, older. There were warrants issued across state lines, cold cases reopened, shelters across several counties began to re-examine adoptions and missing animal reports with new eyes. The web was messy, but it was unraveling. The boy's parents had been located, former foster guardians who lost custody after complaints of abuse. Elijah had been passed through 3 homes before vanishing entirely. When Mercer told them he would not be returning, they didn't argue. They didn't even show up. Instead, a woman from the DA's office stepped forward. Her name was Dana Keller, and she'd lost her brother to a similar case when she was 10. Elijah would be placed with her for now. She'd already installed safety locks, cleared her schedule, and made a space in her home. But when she came to pick him up, something happened no one expected. As Dana knelt beside Elijah, reaching gently for his hand, Zeus stood and blocked her, not aggressively, just firm. Elijah's eyes clung to the dog, panic rising in his small chest. Dana looked up at Mercer. He doesn't want to leave him. Mercer nodded slowly. He doesn't have to. Zeus isn't a tool. He's a partner, and maybe right now, he's the only one Elijah trusts. That night, paperwork moved faster than anyone thought possible. Temporary guardianship, a special handler license issued. Zeus would stay with Elijah indefinitely. Therapy would come. So would challenges. But healing doesn't always begin in a hospital or courtroom. Sometimes, it starts in a quiet room with a dog who simply stays. Weeks passed. Spring warmed the streets. Children returned to playing in front yards. And for the first time in a long time, people in the town started asking different questions when things felt off. More calls came into the station. More tips. People stopped assuming. They started listening. One Saturday morning, Mercer stopped by Dana's house. He didn't need to. He just wanted to check in. He found Elijah in the backyard, sitting on the grass beside Zeus. A small canvas was propped on a crate between them, covered in finger paint and messy brushstrokes. A house, a tree, and beside them, a child, and a large dog standing in front of a barn. Elijah turned his head when Mercer approached. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He reached out and handed Mercer a drawing. It showed the same barn, but this time, it was open. Light poured out through the doors, and standing inside were 4 small figures, each with smiling faces, holding hands. "Is that them?" Mercer asked softly. Elijah nodded, and then he said, "Zeus didn't just find me." Mercer knelt and pulled the boy into a gentle hug, blinking back something fierce in his throat. As the sun slid behind the trees and Zeus stretched out beside them, eyes half-lidded, tail thumping once against the grass, Mercer finally let himself believe something he hadn't in a long time, that even in the darkest places, if you're willing to listen, someone might still be scratching to be found, and sometimes it takes a dog to hear it.